Part 34. Dimensional Chosen, Only I Know Saitama is the Strongest. Author, Mungbean Garden. Chapter 331. Mission 2, Destroy an Alien Warship. Mission Difficulty, Hard. Mission Time, 15 days. Tips: the alien battleship contains the Sigri aliens. After completing the task, Task 1 will be completed simultaneously. Tip: the more damage is done, the higher the final rating will be. Mission 3, Stop the Alien Invasion Plan. Mission Difficulty, Hell. Mission Time, 15 days. Tip: if you do not complete the task within the specified time, you will be banned from the forbidden area. Looking at the 3 tasks that appeared in front of him, Fang Ye did not hesitate to choose the third one. This copy is Avengers, which is very familiar to Fang Ye. As for the reason for the alien invasion, naturally because of Loki. Deep in the distant starry sky, a mysterious man gave him gems and lent him a large number of Sigri Star Coalition forces to use against the invasion. As long as he can close the portal at the end, this task is considered a success. It's done. Fang Ye also knows the method of closing the portal by heart. The current task is to find Suzuki-U, and then implement it according to the plan. There is a white light in front of his eyes, and Fang Ye's sight is blocked. It becomes again it was clear that Fang Ye was already standing in a very dilapidated warehouse. After looking around the surroundings, Fang Ye knew where he was. There was the sound of someone talking not far away, and Fang Ye quickly hid his figure in the container. Behind him, he slowly moved toward the source of the sound. "Hey, you bitch, are you going to tell me or not? I've shown enough patience with you. If it continues like this, we don't mind having some fun with you to pass the time. Don't toast and eat as a penalty." A man in military uniform was slowly pulling out a short black leather whip from behind, looking at the woman tied to the chair with an impatient expression. Fang Ye hid behind the container, activated his eyes, and could also see clearly several people's faces. Tied to the chair is none other than S.H.IEL.DS Ace Agent, Black Widow Natasha. As for the 3 men who are threatening her, unimportant. Watching the man gradually approaching Natasha, Fang Ye felt that there was no need to wait any longer. In a blink of an eye, Fang Ye suddenly appeared behind the 3 of them. He turned his hand into a knife and lightly struck the 3 people on the back of their necks. Plop! The 3 people fainted instantly, and blood slowly flowed from their mouths and noses. "Hey, I haven't started the interrogation yet, how can I kill them?" Natasha was a little dissatisfied and stared at Fang Ye warily. At this moment, this man had solved the 3 of them without even realizing it. He must be very powerful. He might even be better than herself. What's next? Fang Ye waved his hand and said with a relaxed look, "Don't look at me like that, I'm not a threat to you, otherwise I would have dealt with you just now. Also, these 3 people just passed out. I am a good citizen and I will not commit murder or crime." As he said that, Fang Ye picked up the phone from the ground. Natasha looked at him doubtfully, expecting his next move. Suddenly, the phone rang. Fang Ye was not surprised at all. He clicked to connect, and then put the phone away. In Natasha's ear, "Natasha, you must come back now." "Are you kidding me?" Natasha frowned, "I'm still working. Although this work can no longer be carried out." "Just in time, then hurry up and come back." "What's up?" Natasha asked doubtfully, holding a blade that she had conjured up from nowhere in her right hand, and was cutting the hemp rope that bound her over and over again. "Barton is being controlled and needs you now." Coulson tried his best to keep his tone calm, although what happened just now shocked him to the extreme. S.H.I.E.L.D. was invaded and an ace agent was taken away. One of them hit the cosmic cube. This is the first time in the world. Hearing this, Barton was controlled. Natasha frowned and then raised her eyes. Fanya understood and took back the phone. Unexpectedly, the next second, Natasha actually kicked over, pointing directly at the vital point between the legs. Bang! Natasha looked helpless. Sure enough, her sneak attack was unsuccessful. Her ankle was grabbed by Fanya, like a vice. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. Okay, I know I was wrong, let me go. Natasha raised her eyebrows helplessly. Fanya let go of her ankle and said in a bad tone. This is the first time. If there is another time, I don't mind breaking your legs. After all, your role is not that big. Okay, got it? Natasha said impatiently. The rope binding her wrists had been cut off, and it slipped down with a slight shake. After moving her body, which was tied up a bit, Natasha took the mobile phone from Fanya's hand and dialed. They went back. Next, the two started an encrypted call. They were basically secret codes. Although Fanya couldn't hear clearly, he knew the next plot. Carlson directed Natasha to find Dr. Banner, also known as the Hulk. But this was undoubtedly a waste of time for Fanya. In Natasha's shocked eyes, Fanya searched the three people who had fainted, and finally collected more than 100 yuan, and a few that looked valuable. Small object. Then walked away. Natasha? Did you hear my order? Carlson's mouth went dry as he spoke on the other end of the phone, but the other party never replied. Natasha reacted and replied perfunctorily. After getting the coordinates, she hung up the phone. Fanya drifted away, and it didn't take long. He disappeared from sight. Natasha was fascinated and murmured. What a strange guy. Coming out of the warehouse, Fanya quickly walked across the road. Counting more than $100 in his hand, Fanya frowned. These three well-dressed guys didn't expect to be so poor. The three of us can only scrape together 100 yuan, so we can spend it all on a barbecue, okay? Of course, he didn't take the money just to eat barbecue. He stopped a private car on the road and Fanya familiarly stated his purpose using the full-level foreign language, trial version, prepared for him by the forbidden area. And then counted $100 to him. The man readily agreed. The vehicles were driving at high speed on the road, and the surrounding night scenery was stretched into lines, which was a bit beautiful. Fanya frowned. Although the vehicle was moving at a high speed, he always felt that he was getting further and further away from the metropolis. Where are you taking me? Did you notice it? The driver smiled slightly and said without hesitation. You don't think you can get rid of me for $100, do you? You foreigners are so naive. As he said that, the vehicle had stopped next to a wooden house. The driver took out a machete from his bag and said with a threatening face. Hand over your valuables. Dimensional chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mung Garden. Chapter 332. At the same time, the door of the wooden house opened, and several tall men with dark skin came out. Hey, grab a fat sheep and come take a look. The driver stuck his head out of the window and shouted to a few people. When those people heard this, they picked up the guy with excited faces and came over. The fat sheep took the bait, it was really timely. I have been feeling like a bird in my mouth these days, so I have to kill it. Let me see this fat sheep. Hey, is he still a foreigner? A few people looked evil and surrounded Fanya. How could Fanya be afraid of them? With a sarcastic smile on his lips, he stared at the driver in the front row and said. Planning to rob me? Why do you want to borrow some money to spend money? Why do you say it so harshly? The driver said with a playful smile, but he put the knife in his hand on Fanya's neck. There was no doubt about the threat. That may disappoint you, I have no money, and... Fanya said, grabbing the machete on his neck. What? Then you will have to suffer a little. The driver was furious and tried to pull the knife back. But then, his face changed wildly. He saw that his knife was in Fang Ye's hand, as if it was clamped by iron pliers, and he couldn't even pull it out. 1 cent. He quickly opened the car door, rolled out and jumped out, shouting wildly. He's a practicing guy, a tough guy. The faces of the people who came over changed at the same time, and they quickly took out the revolver from their pockets. They pointed it at Fang Ye, who had already got out of the car, and said viciously, "Have you seen this guy in my hand? You'd better be honest with me, or I'll make a hole in your forehead." Oh, Fang Ye raised his eyebrows slightly, and held the machete with a little force. Click. The sound of metal breaking was heard, and several people's teeth ached when they heard it. Then, several broken swords shot out of Fang Ye's hand, and shot through instantly. The thighs of those men were broken. Wails suddenly started, and several people were rolling on the ground holding their bleeding thighs. The driver's expression changed again, and he bent down to pick up the revolver on the ground. His eyes blurred, and the revolver on the ground disappeared. He raised his head, but he saw that the revolver had appeared in Fang Ye's hand. Don't shoot, I know it's wrong, don't shoot, spare my life." He fell to his knees with a plop, and the driver kept begging for mercy. Fang Ye fiddled with the revolver in his hand. "You still want to make a hole in me?" As he said that, under the driver's shocked eyes, Fang Ye pointed the gun at the palm of his hand. Boom! The trigger was pulled, sparks splashed out from the muzzle, and then went out in an instant. As expected, the scene of Fang Ye's palm being penetrated did not appear. Instead, because the muzzle of the gun was blocked, the revolver exploded. A deafening explosion occurred, and the wheel jumped out immediately. "It looks like it's a bit difficult to open an opening in my body." Fang Ye shook his head and squeezed the revolver into a ball with a little force on his palm. "Now, take me to Stark Group." The driver stared at the crushed revolver and swallowed. What kind of monster did he encounter today? He nodded quickly. The driver even felt that the man in front of him could crush himself with his bare hands. Finally, Fang Ye arrived at the Stark building. The moment he got out of the car, the driver stepped on the accelerator to the bottom and rode like a horse. Looking at the man who stepped on the accelerator and ran away, Fang Ye couldn't help but sigh. What a simple folk custom. Immediately afterwards, Bien began to look for Suzuki's missing figure. "I saw her leaning against the corner, boredly observing the cars around her. What an obedient little girl." Fang Ye smiled slightly, and this was considered a formal meeting between the two. Next, Fang Ye's primary goal is to solve Suzuki's ability to protect himself. Although, her strength is relatively not weak. But in this forbidden area where mutations rule and firepower reigns supreme, it's obviously not enough to watch. "I just don't know how Stark can borrow a Mark IV. I hope it won't be too much trouble." After that, he patted Suzuki gently, indicating that she would wait here with peace of mind. He jumped up with both feet, and the concrete floor was directly cracked, and spider web-like cracks spread for several meters. He jumped directly to Stark Industries. "Rooftop? Sir, I'm sorry to disturb your dinner. There is an intruder." Stark, who was sharing a candlelight dinner with Pepper, was suddenly interrupted by Jarvis's voice. He frowned impatiently and ordered, "Just blast it out." "Sorry sir." Jarvis's voice was very humane, and he said apologetically. "The security system failed to drive him away, and the man is now, already outside the door." "What?" Tony Stark's face suddenly changed. He first comforted Pepper, and then waved his hand. Several mechanical arms rose from the ground and began to assemble the armor for him. Halfway through assembling the armor, Stark's eyes suddenly widened. "I saw the metal door suddenly turned red, and then began to deform." "Raise your hand and hit." A laser shot out from the arm that was assembled first, and the explosion shook the whole building. The armor was still being assembled, 2 or 3 times will be completed. Sir, life forms have been detected. The laser just now seems not to have had much effect. Jarvis said through the Bluetooth headset, and at the same time turned on the thermal imaging system. In the smoke, a man was walking easily. Mr. Stark, this greeting seems a bit unpleasant. Fanya waved his hand to disperse the smoke and said easily. Who are you? Stark asked coldly, feeling threatened. Fanya waved his hand, it's just a passerby, don't worry about it. I came here this time just to borrow something from you. Stark raised his eyebrows, blew up my door, and borrowed something? Borrow what? Fanya smiled and said. I'll lend you Mark's armor. With a raised brow, Stark looked at Fanya, who was smiling harmlessly, and said coldly. What if I don't borrow it? You will borrow it? I just won't borrow it, Stark scratched his neck. That, I'll just borrow it? Huh. Listening to this, Stark couldn't think clearly for a moment what kind of borrowing Fanya meant by forcibly borrowing. Suddenly, he saw Fanya's cold eyes and understood instantly. Feelings, borrowing is not the same as what I thought of borrowing. Stark moved his body slightly, and the armor on his body quietly turned on the maximum power. He looked at Fanya coldly, his eyes full of vigilance. This man, although he didn't know what methods did he use. First, he melted his heavy iron door open, and also interrupted his energy beam. But it was definitely not a fuel-efficient lamp. Suddenly, a figure appeared in his mind. Dr. Banner? No Dr. Banner, but the large green man stayed after his rage. It's a bit difficult to solve, Jarvis, are you done analyzing it? Stark asked in a low voice. Sorry sir, the status of this person could not be found in the database. Jarvis' slightly apologetic voice sounded in the Bluetooth headset. There has to be a tough battle to fight. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dimensional Chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mungbean Garden. Chapter 333. Watching the confrontation between the two, Little Pepper suddenly had a bad thought in her mind. I immediately planned to find a place to hide. He hid in the back room and looked at the two of them with his eyes. I saw the two people looking at each other, but neither of them moved. Suddenly, Stark's voice sounded from inside the armor. Good idea, then I have to see how you can force me to borrow money. As he said that, Stark raised his hand and hit Fanya with a palm cannon. Fanya also raised his hand, but there was no subsequent movement. The energy beam came roaring and was caught by Fanya's palm. An explosion sounded. Smoke and dust were everywhere. Stark thought, and the ventilation system of the entire building was opened. The smoke and dust dispersed instantly, and a figure gradually emerged, and Fanya was still standing intact, looking at him with a smile. Stark he was so frightened by what he saw that he raised his hand and fired 2 more palm cannons. Terrifying temperature shot out from his palms, covering Fanya again. A huge explosion sounded, and the whole Stark Tower trembled. Boom! Boom! 2 consecutive shots. There was a loud explosion, and the floor-to-ceiling windows all around were shattered. The biting cold wind blew in, blowing the smoke away again. Stark, I really just borrowed it for a while and will return it to you after use. Fanya said earnestly, he really didn't want to fight Stark. First, it would be a waste of time to continue fighting like this, and it would not be conducive to future cooperation. Second, if Stark was accidentally injured, he would immediately Loki is about to invade the whole city, and it will be really troublesome to have no powerful helpers at that time. Stark saw that the local industry was still not damaged at all, and his eyes were full of disbelief. Even if he hit the enemy with these 2 attacks, the Hulk's body wouldn't be so painless and itchy. What's more, The man opposite him didn't even have any damage to his clothes. What the hell? Where did this great god come from? You have such an awesome physique, and yet? Why do you need my armor? Are you looking for a horse on a donkey? Stark was a little angry, but the cold air released by Jarvis sobered him up. For a while, the two were in a confrontation again. Fanya leisurely standing opposite Stark, thinking about how to convince Stark to lend him the Mark armor. At this time, Stark spoke. Hey, bro, why don't we make a bet? What bet? Fanya looked at him with interest. If you can take my full blow, you win, but if you can't. Stark spread his hands. I don't need to say more about the ending then. Fanya agreed without thinking. Hold on. Stark turned around, and then several mechanical arms stretched out from his feet and removed the armor from his body. Wait for me to change. While he was speaking, the armor on his body had been removed. He stretched out his hand, and a mechanical arm appeared from nowhere, holding a bracelet and placing it in his palm. Put the bracelet on. Stark's face was relaxed, but his heart was like stagnant water. What she had in her hands now was the newly developed Mark No. 7 armor. But compared to the No. 6 armor just now, the main improvement is in the aspect of wearing it. Rather than power. Give it a try? Stark thought, and waved the hand with the bracelet. A red light lit up on the bracelet, indicating that the verification was completed. Then a push spread throughout the Stark building. The sound of the weapon then spun high in the sky of the Stark building. Crack! Crack! The glass was shattered, and red and yellow shadows flew in and slammed into Stark. A cold mechanical sound ringing. Stark finished dressing. Let's start. Fanya made a gesture of invitation. Stark's eyes were serious. He took a step back with his right leg and got into a fighting position. He raised his hands up and down in front of him. The energy spread throughout the armor in the form of blue light waves. It continued to flow up and down. Finally, it was visible to the naked eye that it was converging towards Stark's arms and chest. The hands and elbows deformed one after another, followed closely by the cluster cannon on the chest, which was already shining brightly. 15% of energy remaining. 40% of energy remaining. 30% of the energy is left. Sir, do you really want to do this? Jarvis reminded, if all the energy is concentrated in this blow, the subsequent armor will be just a pile of scrap metal, and Fanya can do whatever he wants. Stark didn't say anything, and the energy continued to gather. 20% energy remaining. 1% of the energy remains and charging is complete. Emission. Stark said in a cold voice. Several beams of energy light waves shot out with terrifying temperatures. All the energy of the armor was poured into it, and the beams had expanded to a terrifying degree. Just by grazing the surroundings, the pillars were chopped off. A small horn. Needless to say, the power within it. Stark watched coldly, feeling uneasy in his heart. He always felt that this move had no effect on the young man in front of him. Is this an illusion? Stark, just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly saw Fanya taking a step forward. He charged up his right fist and punched it with a bang. A serious punch. The terrifying airflow was driven and collided with Stark's attack. For a moment, the original power was the terrifying energy beam actually showed a tendency to collapse. Stark's eyes widened, looking at the shaky attack in front of him. The armor's energy was less than 1%, and it was absolutely impossible to launch another attack. Next, a terrifying scene appeared. Fanya suddenly increased his power, and the energy beam that was originally swaying spread out in an instant and exploded. The huge smoke dispersed, and a figure rushed out of it. Stark's pupils shrank. He saw Fanya rushing over with his fist raised. Holy shit! Stark couldn't help but uttered a curse word. At the same time, he exerted force on his feet, trying to escape. Not enough energy. Jarvis's cold voice sounded, and Stark wanted to give himself a big mouth. Damn, how could he forget this? Come on, now Stark's only means of escape is gone. Fanye's fist is in his side, it keeps spreading. It can hit him with a full blow. It's not surprising that this punch directly breaks his head. Stark thought, filled with regret. Do you think that I, the leader of Stark Heavy Industries, the genius who developed the armor, and the playboy who has won numerous awards, are going to have my head blown off by a kid today? This life is dramatic enough. Just when a revolving lantern was about to appear in front of him, Fanye had already appeared in front of him. The originally terrifying fist suddenly closed, and 2 fingers flicked on his head. No, it bounced on the armor. Kang. A clear sound sounded, and Stark felt his head was forced to shake. Okay, I win, keep your promise, Stark. Dimensional Chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mung Garden. Chapter 334. Stark didn't react for a moment. He originally thought he was going to die, but in the end. Got blown out of your mind? This crisp sound, definitely a good helmet. Thinking about it, Stark took off his mask and looked at Fanye with a wry smile. You win, now you can choose my armor as you like. Stark said, taking Fanye into the elevator. After a while, the two came to the floor where Stark collected armors. Each armor had been repaired by Stark and placed in a glass jar, lying quietly in the middle. The updated iteration of the armor is no longer adapted to the current battle and has withdrawn from the battlefield. Stark looked at these armors, his eyes full of silence. The strong survive, and this is also the case in the armor. Now the one who accompanied him was none other than Mark 7. Previous generations had slept here forever. So was he. The appearance of Fanye made him deeply realize that there was a heaven outside the world. It doesn't seem to be as important as imagined. Clang. Clang. 2 crisp voices sounded, pulling Stark back. Fanye patted his shoulder, then stepped forward to select carefully. Generations of armors were displayed in front of him, and Fanye felt a little unreal for a moment. In the previous life, I was still a Stark fan, holding popcorn and excited for the exciting battles. Now, I have actually seen these armors. Not only can I touch them, I can even choose one as my own. It's so unreal. However, Fanye recovered. Are there many untrue things during this time? After carefully selecting, Fanye turned to look at Stark. Stark was so stared at that when he noticed that Fanye's eyes were on his armor, he immediately refused. My suit of armor has run out of power. Fanye nodded. It's okay, you can recharge it. He was tailor-made for me. It's okay, we are about the same height and size. Fine. Stark was stunned. Why the hell didn't I say anything? Then there was a wave of helplessness on his face. Who made him want to make this bet? He couldn't just let Jarvis use satellite positioning here, blast him. Although, whether it can be hit or not is still unknown. Forget it, give it to him. The armor is gone and can be rebuilt, but the life is gone, that is really gone. Looking at Stark's bitter face, Fanye laughed playfully. Forget it, I won't tease you anymore. Stark. I've done all the mental training, but you're telling me that you're just teasing me. Believe it or not, I asked the satellite to bomb you. Fanye didn't pay attention to his eyes, turned around and pointed at the armor inside a large glass jar. The reactor on the chest was in the shape of a triangle. That's it? Mark 6? Stark breathed a sigh of relief. Although Mark 6 is also a relatively new armor, its beauty lies in, I can't use it anymore. Sure. Stark agreed readily, took 2 steps forward and performed iris verification while saying. The Mark 6 was originally produced, but it took me a lot of effort. In addition to basic combat readiness control, I also used new energy. I replaced all the palladium elements that are harmful to the human body with elements that are good for the body. This new element is really a good thing. Even though I am busy every night, I am still in great shape. Don't you believe I can show you a golden gun? Fang Ye quickly waved his hand. You should keep this thing to show with your little girlfriend. Is your country so hospitable? Soon, the iris verification was completed. Stark gave Jarvis another series of instructions, and emphasized borrowing several times. Fang Ye looked at him helplessly. You are so rich, you can't be generous. Stark laughed and ignored Fang Ye's eyes. He stretched out his hand and handed Fang Ye over. When he came to the armor, he said, come put it on and try it on. I'm not bragging. This armor is warm in winter and cool in summer. Just as he was about to talk endlessly, he saw Fang Ye wave his hand. Not for me, please wait a moment. Then, under Stark's shocked eyes, Fang Ye jumped down from the window. Stark quickly went over to check. This was on the 50th floor. As far as he knew, a certain person with extremely strong physical fitness. Yes, I can only ensure that I am intact after jumping from more than 10 floors. If I jump from the 50th floor, wouldn't I be smashed to pieces? Bang! A huge sound came, and Stark passed through the armor. I saw a deep hole in the ground being smashed by Fang Ye. Immediately afterwards, Fang Ye's figure disappeared from sight. After a while, the elevator went down and was teleported up again. When I opened the door again, Fang Ye appeared in front of me. And a woman with an obviously foreign face. The beautiful face instantly locked Stark's eyes, and he was amazed. So beautiful. Fang Ye walked forward with Suzuki-u, pointing at Mark in the glass jar. 6 Try it. But Suzuki-u was shocked by the scene in front of her. She had understood the worldview of Forbidden Zone number 8, so the person in front of her was naturally familiar. It was the famous Iron Man. Fang Ye took her directly to a place full of mechanical arms. In the clearing, he then looked at Stark. His eyes seemed to be saying, have you seen enough, this old boy? Noticing Fang Ye's eyes, Stark smiled awkwardly, and then gave the order. The robotic arm began to move, one by one. The parts of the armor were taken out and assembled for Suzuki-u. At the same time, Stark also understood. Qing Fang Yi came to him to borrow the armor, not for himself, but for this beauty. How disgusting! Stark gritting his teeth, he thought angrily. This guy actually used his armor to pick up girls. Is there any other way? But, by the way, can this trick be used on Little Pepper? Not long after, the armor was assembled. Suzuki was a little shorter, and his armor was also reduced by one size. Suzuki moved her body, but she didn't expect that using this armor would be like moving her own body. Easy. Okay, that's it. Fang Ye smiled softly and took Suzuki's hand. I've been nagging you for too long today. I'll talk about it next time if something happens. If Mr. Stark needs my help, I'll do it within my ability. As he said that, he took Suzuki out of the window again. Stark looked at the shattered floor-to-ceiling window speechlessly, and was speechless for a while. Can't you just walk through the door? Ding dong. The elevator has arrived. Stark turned his head. Did the two of them leave something behind? The elevator door opened and a bald man walked in. Hello, I am the Carlson who spoke to you before. Long time no see. As he said that, Carlson looked at the broken floor-to-ceiling windows, and then remembered the dilapidated main hall where he went first. He couldn't help but ask Stark, where are you, was it robbed? Looking at the rags around him, Stark gritted his teeth and said, we were robbed. Dimensional chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mungbean Garden. Chapter 335. Carlson scratched the top of his hairless head in confusion. You are Tony Stark. Iron Man. The leader of Stark Heavy Industries, the country can't do anything to you, but someone can actually rob you. Are you kidding me? However, Carlson looked at the tragic scene around him, the heavily armed Stark, and the broken floor-to-ceiling windows. Don't tell me, they really look alike. Carlson shook his head to get rid of the random thoughts in his mind. He didn't come to Stark today for condolences. Afterwards, Carlson explained his purpose to Stark, including the situation of Barton being controlled and the cosmic cube being taken away. While listening, Stark frowned tightly. Then he nodded, "I agree. That's great." Carlson was very surprised and shook hands with Stark in surprise. At the same time, Natasha found a very simple cabin based on the coordinates provided by Carlson. "Hide well, the big fish will come soon, don't be discovered." She waved her hand to signal the soldiers to wait outside, and then walked in. Not long after, Banner was taken to the slums by a little girl she met on the street. The little girl ran all the way, and Banner had no choice but to follow closely. Without thinking too much, Banner opened the tattered door curtain and saw the little girl getting into the secret passage in the wall. "Hey, Banner, you should have collected the money in advance." After saying a few words casually, Banner already knew that he had fallen into a trap. "Dr. Banner." Natasha came out of the dark corner and looked at Banner dignifiedly. "For someone who needs to avoid stress in order to control themselves, I was ill-considered. Is this a starting point for you? Oh, is it very detrimental to me?" Banner smiled, took off his backpack and looked at the surrounding environment easily. "It doesn't take much to avoid stress. You really took great pains to bring me here from the city." Banner said, looking out the window, "I guess this place is surrounded, right?" Natasha looked relaxed and left her shawl on the wooden stool. "It's just you and me. And your little actors." Banner pointed to the secret passage on the wall, with a mocking look on his face. "Is she also an agent? Do you need to start training agents from childhood?" "Me too." Natasha put her hands behind her back and her face became a little unnatural. "What's your name?" "Natasha Romanoff." Rubbing his hands, Banner pondered for a while, and then said, "Are you here to kill me? Is this all because I can't be killed as easily as ordinary people?" "Of course not." Natasha denied it and continued to introduce herself. "I'm here on behalf of SHIELD." SHIELD. Dr. Banner thought for a moment and looked at Natasha. "How did you find me? You may be angry, but we have been paying attention to you, and by the way, we helped you get rid of the little gangsters who tried to cause you trouble." "Why? Nico Fury seems to trust you." Natasha spread her hands and pretended to be relaxed and said, "We need you now." "Need a green maniac to be watched?" Banner laughed at himself and suddenly became serious. "What if I reject you? It's my job to convince you." Then, Natasha didn't waste any time. She took out her mobile phone from her arms and placed the prepared documents in front of Dr. Banner. Banner looked serious and put on his glasses to look at it carefully. "So, does Fury want me to swallow it? The gamma rays he releases are too weak and we cannot search for his coordinates. You are more experienced than us in this regard. I hope you can help us find him. No instructions to capture monsters." Dr. Banner still laughed at himself and did not relax his vigilance against them. Fury didn't say. Natasha pretended to be relaxed and leaned back on the chair. "Talk to Fury, he needs you." Natasha arched her body. Banner's performance was very clear. He has no idea of cooperating yet. This made her feel very difficult. "Arrest me again later?" Natasha shook her head. "I didn't mean to catch you." "Stop lying." Banner slammed his hands on the table and roared. Like a frightened bird, Natasha quickly took out the pistol that had been prepared from under the table and pointed it at Dr. Banner's head. "I'm very sorry." Being pointed at a gun, Banner did not panic, but felt guilty for his behavior just now. "The way you looked just now was too bad." Why don't you put down the gun first and then we can talk in detail? Natasha's eyes widened, and every inch of her muscles tightened. Before she came, she watched the video Carlson sent her on the plane. In it, Banner turned into a crazy green beast, destroying a place with just his fists and feet. The town is destroyed. If Banner attacks now, Natasha will have no power to fight back. Even the entire slum will be razed to the ground, and all the people inside will naturally be killed. Put down the gun and let's chat quietly. Don't worry, the guy won't be angry just yet, Natasha. Banner said softly, lowering his hand slightly. Hearing Banner call her name, Natasha relaxed. She took a deep breath and put down the gun in her hand. If she kept pointing the gun at Banner, she would not be able to protect everyone. When will he suddenly get angry? The alert is off, everything is normal inside. Natasha said to the Bluetooth headset, then took it off and put it on the ground and crushed it with her foot. Good. At the same time, Loki inspected the secret base he found. Eric, how's it going? Looking at this famous astronomer, Loki asked softly. Very good, the equipment here can meet all my needs, but, where did these people come from? Eric said, pointing to the people who were also busy. Among these people were physicists and scientists in the same field as him. It's hard to find people who share our interests, but there are too many people who have hatred against Fury. As he said that, Loki passed by him, sat on a chair and was stunned. With a flash of the staff in his hand, the whole person began to wander. After a long time, Loki took a deep breath and raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. Hateful. The scepter hit the ground hard, his eyes extremely gloomy. I once wore a yellow robe, who do you think you are? Stark stood there and put away the weapon that he had not yet released. Did you do this? Captain Me shook his head. As soon as I arrived, I saw Loki kneeling on the ground. Probably him. Team Me pointed at Fang Ye. Seeing Iron Man arrive at the battlefield, Fang Ye smiled and went over to say hello familiarly. Long time no see, Mr. Stark. Yes, I just saw it. Stark looked at the robber with a displeased face. Then he pointed at Loki, who was kneeling on the ground and raising his hands in surrender. Did you do this? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dimensional Chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mungbean Garden. Chapter 336. On the sea in Wanyang, a warship was patrolling the sea. The sound of an engine running came from the sky, and the people working couldn't help but stop and watch. I saw two fighter planes circling down and landing steadily on it. Agent Romanoff, this is Captain Rogers. Carlson stood next to the idle team and introduced Black Widow. Hello madam. Hi. Natasha nodded, then looked at Carlson and said. There is something wrong with the engine and you need to check it out. Okay. After Carlson finished speaking, he trotted away. It took a lot of effort to find you in the ice. I thought he would faint from excitement when he saw you. Natasha looked at Team Me with a smile, curled her lips and signaled to Carlson. Mr. Banner. The two walked forward and saw a slightly familiar figure. Team Me was the first to say hello. He read the information provided by Fury, including Dr. Banner. Of course, it was the Green Fury version. Hey. Banner shook hands with him and said, nice to meet you. I heard you can find the cosmic cube. Team Me had a smile on his face and said easily. There may be other rumors. Banner rubbed his hands, still feeling guilty about his past. The look in his eyes that others regarded him as a monster, even after he defeated the abomination, could not be eliminated from his heart. I only care about the cosmic cube. Team Me smiled slightly. These may be unfamiliar to you. The two of them walked on the battleship and started talking. A huge sound of motors filled their ears. What happens? Could this be a submarine? The Me team was a little confused. When they walked to the edge of the battleship, they saw a huge whirlpool emerging out of thin air on the sea surface. At the same time, the same three whirlpools appeared in other directions of the entire battleship. The sea water was drained, revealing a huge propeller. Then the whole battleship began to rise and turned into a huge spaceship. Turn on blocking mode. Fury gave the order at the command center and then invited several people in. Just now, we captured a trace of gamma radiation signal, thus demarcating an area, and are now calling up the monitoring of that area. Fury said, and at the same time the big screen in front of him changed. A thin and tough face appeared in front of several people. Fury opened his eyes wide, stared at the person on the screen and said softly, "Found it." Then, he briefly described Loki's identity to several people. "Captain, you may need to go there." Fury looked at Team Me and said sincerely, "This is what I should do." In an opera house, Fang Ye was strolling around leisurely with Suzuki, who had taken off his armor. "Is this your plan?" Suzuki's little face was full of doubts. It might be understandable to get the armor at first. But now, no matter how you look at it, it looks like you are having fun. Okay. Relax. Fang Ye smiled softly and patted Suzuki's hair. "The dim sum here is pretty good, should you try it?" Fang Ye said, took out a small cake from the silver tray and handed it to Suzuki. "All right." Reluctantly, Suzuki took the cake and took a bite. Although the current situation is very different from the scene Suzuki imagined, as long as Fang Ye is here, he has confidence. Suddenly, a riot broke out in the crowd. A tall and thin man used the cane, easily eliminated the bodyguard, threw a wealthy gentleman onto the table, and pressed the prepared device on his face. A scream sounded, and Loki's mission was completed. But he had no intention of retreating at this time. Golden light suddenly appeared around the crowd, and several clones surrounded the chaotic crowd. "Kneel down!" Loki roared, and his divine power spread across the place. Some people in the crowd began to waver, although some knelt down one after another. "Very good, isn't this your servility? How does it feel to be aroused now?" Loki looked at everyone with a mocking face, enjoying the pleasure of domination. "That is, Loki, the instigator of this chaos." The man Suzuki kept talking about quickly recognized his identity. "Don't we stop him?" Suzuki raised his little face and looked at Fang Ye doubtfully. "No, someone will come." Fang Ye smiled slightly and took a bite of the cake in his hand. "It tastes good." Suddenly, an old figure stood up in the crowd, looking at Loki with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" Loki was stunned for a moment, then smiled. "I am unmatched." The old man shook his head and said calmly, "There are always people outside people, and there are mountains outside mountains." In an instant, the smile on Loki's face disappeared, and he said majestically to the people kneeling on the ground behind him, "Look at this old man, he seems a little different." A flash of blue light suddenly appeared in the staff in his hand. "Then I'll give you a little punishment to serve as a warning to others." A trace of panic flashed across the old man's face, and he watched helplessly as the blue light shot toward him. Boom! A burst of sparks lit up, and a trace of surprise appeared on Loki's face. "Who?" After helping the fallen old man up, Fang Ye looked at the horizon and said with disgust, "So slow." A trace of displeasure flashed across Loki's face again. "Mortal, didn't you hear what I was asking you?" "Me?" Fang Ye pointed at himself and said with a smile, "Passerby." Loki laughed angrily and looked at the beautiful oriental face in front of him, then just pass by. The blue light lit up, and a ray shot out from the scepter, pointing directly at Fang Ye. With a slight wave of his hand, Fang Ye easily deflected Loki's energy wave. He kicked his feet on the ground, and his whole body shot out. Bang! Fanya showed no mercy and punched Loki on the helmet. Loki's eyes blurred, followed by a buzzing sound in his head, as if he had been hit head-on by a high-speed train. Fly out? Puff. Loki shook his head and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. What a mockery, he is even stronger than the Asgardian who wields a hammer. Supporting his body, Loki looked at the man in front of him again. Not to mention fighting, just the first collision, Loki felt that he was definitely no opponent except himself. A faint golden light emerged from his body, and the costume of the god of conspiracy instantly disappeared. Loki knelt down on one knee and slowly raised his hands. I surrender. Bang. In the center of the crowd, a blue figure fell down. Fanya looked at the rice team that had just arrived speechlessly. It must have been too slow. What's going on with your shield? Follow closely. There was a burst of noise in the whole opera house, and a very slutty voice spread throughout the place. What followed was a very touching music. Fanya looked up and saw a burst of red light flashing in the sky. With red, the armor with the theme drew a beautiful arc in the sky and landed smoothly on the ground. Oh! Reindeer knocked down. Dimensional chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mung Garden. Chapter 337. Fanya didn't hide anything and nodded naturally. What a weakling, surrendering so quickly. Stark was still very angry and vented his anger everywhere. Loki curled his lips. How about you try to get punched by him? Of course, as the god of trickery, Loki is not someone who surrenders casually. His mind, a careful plan has been made, and being captured is also one of them. The sound of jets sounded, and a fighter plane appeared above everyone. Hey, good job. Natasha controlled the fighter plane and shouted to several people. Then, Fanya and Suzuki were invited onto the fighter plane. Together with Loki, who was shackled, they flew towards Fury's battleship. Hello, I'm Steve Rogers, the driver is Natasha Romanoff, this. Tony Stark, we've met. Fanya shook hands with him with a smile and said softly. After chatting for a few words, Fanya noticed Suzuki who was staring at Loki. What's wrong? Fanya touched Suzuki's hair and asked. Nothing, just, I feel he is very capable of fighting. Why did he surrender like this? Suzuki tilted his head and said softly. Indeed, I thought so too. The Me team nodded, looking at Rocky sitting silently in his seat, feeling a little headache. Tony shook his head, looking at the Me team with eyes full of contempt. Isn't it normal to surrender when you are unable to defeat someone? Maybe you should update your storage from hundreds of years ago. Fury didn't tell me you were coming back. The Me team was also a little angry by him. Similarly, Fury didn't tell me. It seems that I need to reconsider whether to accept his invitation. The two started bickering as soon as they met, and Natasha shook her head. Click. Suddenly, a flash of lightning flashed in the sky. Strange, the Meteorological Bureau did not warn that it will rain today. Natasha was a little confused. After all, the information they obtained was extremely accurate. Even such trivial information as the weather had no errors. Tony looked at Loki, who was shocked by the thunder, and mocked. What's up, Bambi? Are you afraid of thunder? Do you want to take your mother over and give you a hug? Loki spread his hands, not interested in Tony's ridicule. I'm more worried about what happens next. Just as he was talking, the fighter plane suddenly sounded an alarm. Something alive is approaching. Bang. Suddenly, the door of the fighter plane was forcefully opened, and a man wearing strange armor appeared in front of everyone. Oh, another surprise. Tony raised his hands, and the energy beam began to charge. Unexpectedly, Thor, the god of thunder, stepped forward and knocked Tony away with a hammer. Then he grabbed Loki, swung the hammer and left. Looks like another troublesome Asgardian. Tony stood up and walked to the door. Hey Tony, the Me team wanted to stop him, you should designate a battle plan before setting off. Tony looked back at him and said, my plan is to fight. Then he jumped down and chased after the two people who left. The captain looked at it for a while, then stretched out his hand to pull off a parachute bag, and then jumped down. Aren't you going to follow? Natasha turned around and looked at Fang Ye, who had his legs crossed. Fang Ye spread his hands and said, okay, then I'll go and have a look to prevent the Tin Man from getting beaten up. After comforting Suzuki-u, Fang Ye jumped down. Natasha looked at his jumping action and asked in surprise. Hey, doesn't he need a parachute? Jumping off the fighter plane, Fang Ye decisively performed the air dance technique. The whole person slowly floated in the air. Then, with a thought, the whole person flew out, no slower than Tony's speed. Not long after, Fang Ye saw Tony on a small island. I saw that he and Thor, the god of thunder, were already on opposite sides, facing each other. You'd better get out now, Tin Man, or I'll hammer your armor to pieces. Thor raised the hammer in his hand and warned Stark. You should consider the consequences of your mother catching you wearing her cloak. Tony didn't say much, and went straight into fighting mode. As soon as he finished speaking, the battle was about to break out. Thor, god of thunder, threw hard and threw the hammer in his hand directly. Tony Stark was hit from the front, and his whole body followed, then it flew out. Thor waved, and the hammer turned around strangely and flew directly back into his hand. Tony Stark didn't say much, gathered the energy cannons in his hands and hit Thor directly. Fire burst out, and Thor was also hit and flew out, breaking several big trees. Click. A bolt of thunder suddenly appeared from the ruins, and the power of Thor instantly hit the reactor on Tony Stark's chest. After being knocked back several steps, I was so blinded by the dazzling thunder that I couldn't even open my eyes. The energy is charged to 400%. Jarvis' voice rang in his ears. Tony was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted, then let him taste this. Raising both hands at the same time, the energy-filled light shot out directly. Thor, the god of thunder, was hit again, and his whole body flew out again. Damn monkey! With an angry roar, Thor, the god of thunder, directly raised his war hammer. Click. A thunder suddenly appeared in the sky and rushed towards Thor, the god of thunder. The terrifying thunder began to fill the air, filling the surroundings instantly. Thor's eyes were defeated, and thunder surged in them. The whole body was shrouded in thunder, and the pale light illuminated the surroundings. Try this. Boom. There was a loud bang, and thunder filled with the power of Thor shot out from the top of the hammer, heading straight for Tony Stark. It's so noisy. Fang Ye moved, and his figure disappeared instantly. Although Tony Stark's armor can absorb thunder as energy, such a huge attack is likely to overheat the reactor load on his chest, and even burn his entire body. Roasted. Fang Ye had to take action. In an instant, Fang Ye appeared between the two of them. His right hand instantly turned into flames, and balls of flames poured out from his palm, wrapping up the lightning bolts. All the armed colors were attached to his left hand, easily withstood Tony Stark's energy beam. The energy escaped and merged around Fang Ye, creating a huge explosion. Boom! Flames wrapped around thunder, flashing with a large number of sparks, instantly filling the entire island. A huge shock wave it spread directly, raising the forest to the ground in an instant. The shackled Loki stood on the rock admiring the gorgeous explosion, and sighed. At the same time, he felt happy in his heart. Fortunately, he surrendered, otherwise he could catch Tony's at the same time with his bare hands. Fang Ye, who was attacked by Tucker and Thor, definitely had the strength to kill him before others arrived. Dimensional Chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mung Garden. Chapter 338. Have you had enough trouble? Fanya looked at the two people and said seriously. Thor looked at the effect of the huge explosion and Fanya, who was not damaged at all. His heart was filled with shock. This human being actually received his full blow with his bare hands. Not only that, or one hand. Tony Stark also put away his firepower. Only this time did he understand the current situation. Even if I join forces with that muscular man who is good at using a hammer, we probably won't be a match for this robber. The two calmed down instantly, just as the Rice team arrived at the battlefield. Fanya glanced at him and thought to himself, "You're finally here. Quickly use your mouth to deal with these two guys." Team Me dropped his parachute and landed smoothly, looking around in surprise. He walked up to Sol with serious eyes. "What are you here for?" "To put an end to Loki's conspiracy," Sol's voice was loud. "Then prove it to me." Medui slowly approached and said, "Put down the hammer." "Impossible." Stark shook his head and pointed at the hammer in Thor's hand. "He almost loves this hammer." As soon as these words came out, Thor swung the hammer in his hand to give Stark a blow. Suddenly, Thor felt his wrist being strangled, and he couldn't move forward even an inch. He turned around and saw that it was indeed the Earthling just now. "Haven't you had enough trouble yet?" Fanya looked at Sol with cold eyes. "If you haven't caused enough trouble, I wouldn't mind playing with you." Enough is enough. When the Me team saw that several people were about to start a fight again, they quickly stood up, looking like veteran cotters. "If what you just said is true, you shouldn't be our enemy, but work together to organize Loki's conspiracy. The cosmic cube has been moved by Loki, and we haven't been able to find it yet. It is estimated that it won't be long before Eric can crack the material that activates the cosmic Rubik's Cube. At that time, we will be facing an unprecedented disaster." Captain Me told Thor everything about the current situation word for word. Listening to his words, Thor forced himself to calm down and began to think while breathing heavily. After a long time, he calmed down and nodded heavily. "Nod. All right." Not long after, Natasha followed the trajectory of the three and caught up here. The fighter plane slowly landed, and the three of them got on the plane one after another, gathering towards Fury's ship. A fully armed warship with stealth mode turned on was traveling at high speed through the dark clouds. The main conference room, where the main members of the Avengers sit. Fanya took Suzuki and found a seat to sit down as well. Compared to the little girl's uneasiness, Fanya seemed much more natural. The big screen in the center changed, and Loki's figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes. "Hey, Loki." Fury took the walkie-talkie in his hand and called out to Loki, who was imprisoned in the glass cage. "This cage is specially made for you. In case you don't understand, whenever you want to escape, even if you just slap the glass," Fury said, tapping on the glass panel in front of him. Suddenly, Loki was surrounded by white updrafts, and his robes blew loudly. The rotating plate under the cage rotated, and a huge hole appeared. "There is an abyss waiting for you below, and this cage," Fury reminded loudly, and then closed the rotating plate. "You," and Fury pointed at Loki, and then looked at the control device in front of him. "These are boots. I hope you can understand and don't do stupid things, otherwise." Fury glanced at Thor, who was holding his arms in his arms. "Your brother will be sad." "What a good cage." Loki showed a relaxed smile and looked at the extremely sturdy glass cover. "I'm afraid, this was not built specifically for me." Fury did not shy away and said, "It was built for a creature much stronger than you." "The strongest creature on Earth." After thinking for a moment, Fury added again. "I heard about it." Loki slowly turned his body, looking at the cameras that surrounded him in all directions, and finally his eyes were fixed in one direction. In front of the big screen, Dr. Banner was slightly startled. From his perspective, Loki was facing him. See? A helpless beast, but still pretending to be immortal, so desperate. Loki sighed, his eyes full of pity. What a pathetic creature to let such a beast protect you. Loki turned his head again, as if he could see through the camera, and his eyes were fixed on Fury. How do you feel? The feeling of falling short. Just a little bit away, you can control endless energy, the most majestic power in the universe. After taking control of this power, what do you plan to do? Loki's face was full of ridicule, and he smiled evilly and said, "For the sake of the light of all mankind?" Fury was speechless. He felt like he was being seen through by Loki, who was 100 meters away. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, "If you need a magazine to pass the time, I'll be happy to oblige." Then he tapped his fingers on the glass panel in front of him, and the big screen closed. Is he very likable? Is not it? Banner showed an interested smile on his face and said to the people around him, "He was just stalling for time." Captain Me shook his head, then looked at Sol. "What does Loki want to do?" Thor stood next to the round table and told Loki everything about summoning the Sigurians. "There is no doubt that he wants to take over the earth, but this is by no means his ultimate goal." Tony Stark, led by Coulson, came to the place where everyone gathered. "Don't be too quick to say no, and keep in touch after it's over." Stark made a gesture of calling, and then turned his attention to everyone. "Don't be nervous, you swing the hammer pretty well." Gently patting Thor's explosive muscles, Stark passed by him easily. "Fury has already experimented with the cosmic cube, which can easily open the portal. As for the required materials, Agent Barton can easily obtain them." As he spoke, Stark poked at the control panel beside him. "What he lacks at present is high density and sustainable energy." "You mean," Stark Heavy Industries' latest research on clean energy. Fang Ye casually took down a pack of plum blossoms from the shelf, took out two and put them in his mouth. "Hey, you robber." Stark snatched the huame from Fang Ye's hand and poured a large handful into his mouth. "He is really a competent robber, and he didn't even let go of my little girl." Fang Ye spread his hands helplessly, reached out and grabbed a handful from the plum bag, and sat down next to Suzuki. "Want something to eat?" Fang Ye put a few pieces into Suzuki's hand without any doubt, and then stuffed the rest into his mouth. Suzuki was slightly startled. Why hadn't he discovered Fang Ye's foodie attribute before? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dimensional Chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mungbean Garden. Chapter 339. But the little robber is right. The clean energy I recently researched is the most dense energy in the entire country. You mean that ugly Stark Tower? Stark was slightly startled, looked at Team Me who had just spoken, and instantly gave up his plan to give him some words. "Old man, what you say is really unpleasant." Stark turned to look at Fang Ye. "The high-density energy that can open the cosmic cube is not only owned by Stark Heavy Industries, you know, it can be found everywhere." As he spoke, he pointed to the battleship at his feet. "But having said that, I do still have some things to ask. Agent Hill, how can Fury see this?" "Just turn around," female Agent Hill said softly. "It's really troublesome." Stark frowned and took out his mobile phone from his pocket. "Jarvis started cracking S.H.I.E.L.D.'s database before I came here. Can you explain that?" Tony Stark said, tapping his finger on it, and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s crimes were listed one by one. "And this?" A door opened. Banner didn't know where he went. He was holding a heavy weapon in his left hand and threw it directly on the table. "According to my investigation, this is a weapon activated by the cosmic cube. Who are you going to use it against?" Banner looked around and asked meaningfully. "I. Mr. Stark? Or you, Loki's demigod brother?" The door opened, and Fury's figure appeared in front of everyone. "I have to admit, this weapon is meant to be used against you." Fury pointed at Thor. Last year, someone destroyed a small town because of some personal grudges. Of course, it can also be used to deal with out-of-control green beasts. Fanya leaned on the back of his chair and watched everyone holding their own opinions. There's going to be a quarrel, and children can't watch it? Suzuki was pulled away by Fanya with a confused look on his face. Then, everyone in the Avengers started arguing fiercely. I've seen your information. Team Me walked up to Tony Stark, a selfish person who can do anything for himself. How dare such a person call himself a hero? Why not? Tony Stark spread his hands. Team Me looked at Tony and poked his chest with his finger. Without your armor, what are you? Genius, billionaire, philanthropist. Tony said without hesitation. But even if someone doesn't have your title, they can do things hundreds of times better than you. You don't have the spirit of sacrifice. Are you ready to lie down on the iron net and let your teammates step on your body? Tony curled his lips and said, I will cut the iron net open. Cleverness again, Tony Stark, that's all you can do. Team Me's face was full of disdain, and his dissatisfaction with Tony burst out in full force. How about you? Tony took 2 steps forward and looked at the Me team without any timidity. What are you? A lab product? Throw away the serum in the boiling tube, you or what? Cannon fodder. Sole question. The Me team was speechless and said bitterly. Put on your armor and let's fight. I won't hit the old man, but I'm not afraid of you. Put on your armor, let's fight. The two were facing each other, and the battle seemed to be about to begin in the next second. Boom. Suddenly, a burst of explosions came from outside, and the battleship shook for a while and then began to tilt. What happened? Before Fury had time to ask any more questions, the current status of the battleship was reported from the Bluetooth headset. Taking a deep breath, he looked at everyone. The engine was destroyed, possibly Loki's plot. After that, he turned around and left. Team Me put on the armor. Tony, you don't need to tell me. On the other side, after hearing that this incident was Loki's conspiracy, Thor strode to the room where Loki was being held. But I saw that the door of the prison cage had been opened. Loki. Thor immediately became alert, roared and rushed over. Seeing Thor rushing over, Loki just lowered his body slightly, and his hands glowed with golden light. Thor actually passed through his body and fell into the glass cage. Middle. My stupid brother, when will you learn to be smarter? As he spoke, Loki pressed the glass panel in front of him without hesitation, and the glass cage fell instantly. Thor. Coulson also rushed here. When he saw Thor falling, he quickly turned the gun in his hand and pointed it at Loki. Suddenly, there was a stabbing pain in his lower back, and his whole body went limp. He turned around and saw Loki didn't know when he was behind him, and his body had been pierced by the dagger in Loki's hand. Is this God? Coulson murmured, wiped the blood that spilled from the corner of his mouth, and collapsed to the ground. Loki smiled slightly and turned around to leave. You won't win. Loki turned his head, looked at the dying Coulson, and smiled. Why? Because, you have no faith. Boom. The gun in his arms was triggered instantly, and a red laser hit Loki, and his whole body was sent flying. Coulson. Fury arrived and pulled the trigger in his hand continuously, interrupting Loki who was about to cast a spell. Then, he watched Loki disappear in front of his eyes. Outside, Tony used all his firepower to turn the damaged propeller, and then narrowly escaped from the rotating propeller. After solving the controlled agent, he stood directly opposite the Me team. Suddenly, the communication settings were connected, and Fury's voice came in. Agent Coulson died. But the medical team is on its way to you. Has been declared dead. Boom. A thunder exploded in the hearts of the two of them. If there is anyone on this battleship who they can talk to, it must be Carlson, who is kind and very humble. Tony Stark couldn't believe it. A few hours ago Carlson, who was still talking to me, is now on both sides of the aisle with him. Something's wrong with Loki. Suddenly, Tony said something coldly. The Me team looked impatient. Of course something is wrong, he is not human. No, Tony waved his hand. I mean, since he wanted to escape, why did he gather us first? Why not defeat each one? The Me team fell into silence. In comparison, it is obviously easier to defeat each one. What he needs is audience. After saying that, Tony patted his head and said regretfully, I should have thought of it earlier, he is a born actor. What he needs now is a stage where he can show himself in front of all living beings, and a stone tablet on which his name can be engraved. You mean that ugly building of yours? Team Me suddenly spoke up. Tony nodded, too lazy to refute. Wear your uniform and an hour will be enough to repair your armor. Tony said, turned, and left. Dimensional chosen, only I know Saitama is the strongest. Author, Mung Garden. Chapter 340. Loki escaped. Natasha looked at Team Me's back and asked softly. Captain Me turned around and noticed Barton standing behind her. The crisis has been resolved, and now our shared mission is to find Loki. Natasha quickly interrupted and informed Barton of his recovery. I also need to put an arrow in his eye socket so I can sleep well. Can you fly a jet? Barton raised his hand. I can. Okay, get ready. A few people were equipped, intercepted a fighter plane that was about to take off, and threw the pilot out of the driving seat without any explanation. Warning, fighter number 6 was intercepted by an unknown person. Do missiles need to be blocked? Fury stood in front of the huge glass window, watching the fighter planes and Tony Stark flashing past his eyes. They found Loki. Agent Hill nodded and lowered his eyebrows to stop their request. At the same time, Fanya and Suzuki, who had put on the armor, landed around the Stark Heavy Industries building. Get ready, a battle is about to begin here. I know. Suzuki nodded, but when he thought of the majestic battle scenes he had seen on the school intranet, he couldn't help but worry. Are you sure it's okay? Do not worry. Fanya gave him a comforting look, and after a few words of warning, he jumped up and went straight to the top of the Stark building. Bang! Fanya's footsteps landed smoothly, and Stark arrived just in time. Long time no see, Mr. Stark. Yes, I saw him just now, a robber. Stark was suspended in mid-air and noticed the surging energy device. Dr. Eric, turn it off. I cannot do it. Eric yelled, once it's turned on, no one can stop it. Is it? Tony Stark expressed disbelief, and his hands buzzed. Boom. 2 beams of energy hit around the universe cube, were blocked by an energy defense, and then exploded. Even Stark couldn't withstand the boom. This shock wave caused him to do some somersaults in mid-air before he stabilized his body. Eric rolled several times on the ground and slammed his head against the wall. Hey, Loki is there. Fanya remained unmoved and pointed at Loki, who was a few meters away. The target is there. Let's go have a drink. Stark said, walking on the round platform. The damaged armor on his body was removed by the mechanical arm stretched out from the ground, revealing his original appearance. Loki understood and knew that he had nowhere to escape, so he walked simultaneously with the 2 of them. Got in. Have a drink. Stark skillfully picked up the wine he had stored and poured himself a glass. He poured another glass for Fanya, and then looked at Loki. Have a drink. Loki said, but his eyes were fixed on Fanya. Fanya didn't care about him. He picked up the wine that Stark poured and took a sip. As expected of a billionaire, the wine he saved is all good stuff. Why do you have the guts to follow me? Aren't you afraid of being captured by us again? Stark lay comfortably on the chair and looked at Loki in front of him leisurely. What's the point of taking me away? The army of the Sigurians is coming soon and is unstoppable. Loki said, with a hint of a conspiratorial smile on his face. The two looked at each other, and then laughed. Are the people from Sigrid so powerful? Do you know who you pissed off? Stark stood up and paced around the room. You pissed off the Avengers. This planet was invaded, and we have a real target for revenge. The Avengers. Loki looked confused. This was the first time he heard this name. What do we call ourselves? Not bad. Loki said, and glanced at Fanya again, and saw that he was still enjoying the wine leisurely, and then he felt relieved. Suddenly, the scepter in his hand burst into light, and the tip touched Stark's chest. Clang! A crisp voice sounded. Loki didn't pay attention, but looked at Stark. Why wasn't he brainwashed by his scepter? Has your fairy wand failed? Stark spread his hands. Fanya was here, and he was not nervous at all. Clang! The scepter bloomed again and pressed against Stark's chest. There was another crisp sound. Stark was not as Loki imagined. There was a reaction, but he took a sip of wine comfortably. You know, maybe something went wrong, 1 out of 5 times. You. Loki was furious, stretched out his hands to grab Stark's throat, and wanted to throw him off the roof. For a moment, Loki felt that his right hand was being controlled. He turned around and saw that it was Fanya who was holding it. His own wrist. Fanya met his eyes, smiled slightly, and then his palm began to exert force. Crack! A crisp sound came from Loki's wrist. Just being held by Fanya, his own hand bones actually cracked. Loki let go of his hand in pain, and Stark fell down. Let me introduce, this is my bodyguard. Stark calmed down and pointed to Fanya next to him and said softly. Fanya glanced at him. This guy is really talking about the train. Loki loosened his grip, and Loki's wrist escaped the fate of being crushed. He squatted on the ground and hugged his almost broken wrist. Jarvis, get ready to come out. Stark snapped his fingers, and the secret door on the side opened, and a red armor suit shot out. This is the Mark 7 he prepared. It is equipped with an infrared positioning system that the previous one did not have. There are no differences in other aspects. The next second, the device on the roof reached its limit. A blue beam of light shot straight into the sky, punching a big hole in the clouds. Then, the hole began to become deep, and there seemed to be an endless universe inside. The Zygry army is coming and no one can stop them. Even though his wrist was almost broken, Loki still laughed loudly. Go up and check it out and see what tricks this alien army has up its sleeve. Stark said, and jumped out of the window. Fanya nodded, knocked out Loki with one punch, and then walked up. The portal was opened, and the Sigri aliens who had been preparing for the attack rushed in. Come out. Stark floated in mid-air, frowning as he looked at the troops pouring out of the portal. Yes, the military. After saying that, the battle mode was instantly turned on, and Stark turned into a red light and rushed forward. Boom boom boom. The energy beams continued to shoot out, and Stark rushed to the front of the several Sigri aliens driving aircraft. Exploded. The body was constantly floating in the air, dodging the massive Kiguri people who were rushing down. At this time, Fanya stood on the edge of the rooftop, looking at Suzuki, who was flying up with his armor. Many. Suzuki sighed for a while. The Kiguri people were almost overwhelming, half of the sky was covered.